The security footage played in stark black and white across the Patterson family's living room television. 10-year-old Emma sat frozen between her father and Officer Reynolds, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the screen's glow. The timestamp read 4:37 p.m. "Watch," Officer Reynolds said quietly, pointing as Emma's small figure pedaled frantically into frame. Behind her, 50 yards back, a large German shepherd with matted fur raced into view, tongue lolling, one ear partially missing. The dog's determined pursuit made James Patterson's jaw tighten. "Keep watching," the officer insisted. The camera angle widened to capture 3 teenagers emerging from the woods, hurling rocks. Then the scene jumped to another camera, showing savage Rottweilers lunging toward Emma's bicycle. From his porch across the street, 78-year-old Arnold Weber lowered his binoculars, his weathered face grave as he reached for his telephone. "My God," James whispered as the footage continued, his garden rake now forgotten against the wall. "This can't be." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Pinewood. Oregon existed as 2 distinct communities separated by the dense stretch of Whispering Pines Trail. The east side housed the more affluent neighborhoods, while the west remained working class and unpretentious. What linked these worlds was a winding dirt path through the forest that locals had traveled for generations. Emma Patterson had made the journey between her father's modest 2-bedroom home and her grandmother Barbara's Victorian farmhouse countless times. At 10 years old, with copper-colored hair and a constellation of freckles across her nose, Emma possessed the confident independence that often worried her father. 3 years after losing her mother to cancer, Emma had developed a stubborn self-reliance that both impressed and terrified James Patterson. James, a construction foreman with calloused hands and permanent worry lines etched into his forehead, had raised Emma alone since his wife's passing. At 42, he divided his life between work, parenthood, and the constant fear that he wasn't doing either particularly well. His mother-in-law, Barbara, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and forthright opinions, provided the maternal guidance he knew Emma needed. 8 kilometers separated their homes. But James had reluctantly agreed to Emma's bike rides through the woods after Barbara installed the tracking app on Emma's phone. "She needs some freedom, James," Barbara had insisted. Margaret would have wanted that. What none of them knew was that another soul had recently arrived in Pinewood. The German shepherd, known once as Ranger, now lived as a shadow among the trees. His coat, once glossy black and tan, had grown dull and patchy, particularly around the burn scars that stretched across his left flank. His amber eyes, which had once shone with loyal devotion, now held the wary vigilance of a survivor. 3 months earlier, Ranger had awakened to smoke and flames in the Henderson family home. He'd managed to drag 7-year-old Tyler from his bed before the ceiling collapsed. The family had survived, but in the chaos of that night, they believed their beloved dog had perished. Rescued later by firefighters, Ranger had been taken to the county shelter, where his increasingly withdrawn behavior and scarred appearance made him unadoptable. After 2 months, his time had run out, the night before his scheduled euthanasia. He'd slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, disappearing into the wilderness that bordered Pinewood, a ghost dog searching for purpose in a world that had forgotten him. Barbara Patterson stood on her wraparound porch, hands planted firmly on her hips as she watched Emma secure her backpack. The late June heat had already settled across the yard, shimmering above the gravel driveway where Emma's blue Schwinn bicycle leaned against the porch steps. "I made you some extra sandwiches," Barbara said, passing a brown paper bag to her granddaughter. "And there's a water bottle in the side pocket of your backpack. It's nearly 90 degrees out there today." Emma tucked the lunch into her pack with a dutiful nod. "Thanks. Nana, Dad's making spaghetti tonight, so I can't be late." Barbara frowned, glancing at the tree line where the trail disappeared into the dense pines. "I still don't understand why James won't just drive over and pick you up. Those woods aren't as safe as they used to be. Dad works till 4, and it would take him forever to drive all the way around," Emma explained with the patient tone children reserve for adults who worry too much. "Besides, I've done this a million times." "Not alone you haven't," Barbara muttered. Ever since her daughter Margaret's passing, she'd felt doubly protective of Emma. "At least wait until the temperature drops a bit." Emma adjusted her purple helmet, clicking the strap securely beneath her chin. "If I wait, it'll be getting dark when I get home, and Dad would freak out even more." She mounted her bike with practiced ease. "I'll call you when I get home. Promise." Barbara sighed, recognizing the determined set of Emma's jaw, Margaret's determination reborn in her daughter. "Straight home. Emma Grace Patterson. No detours, no stopping to look at those raspberry bushes like last time." Emma pedaled down the driveway, calling over her shoulder, "Love you, Nana." "Lord help that child," Barbara whispered, making the sign of the cross as she watched Emma disappear down the path, unseen, in the shadows beneath the ancient oak at the edge of Barbara's property. Ranger lifted his head. 3 days he'd been scavenging in the area, drawn by the scraps Barbara left out for neighborhood strays, a habit James often criticized as encouraging wildlife. The German shepherd had kept his distance, too wary of humans after his time at the shelter. But something about the girl stirred memories of Tyler, the same small frame, the same fearless energy. When Emma pedaled into the forest, Ranger rose from his resting place, wincing at the pull of scar tissue along his flank. After a moment's hesitation, he followed, keeping to the underbrush, maintaining a cautious 50 yards between them. The forest path dappled Emma's journey with shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. She pedaled at a steady pace, occasionally standing on the pedals to navigate a rough patch or incline. Birds called overhead, and somewhere a woodpecker drummed against bark. Normal forest sounds that masked Ranger's careful movement behind her. 20 minutes into her journey, Emma stopped to take a drink from her water bottle. The sudden silence, no more crunching of bicycle tires on dirt, alerted Ranger, who froze mid-step. When Emma capped her bottle and glanced around, he ducked behind a thick pine trunk. "Hello?" Emma called, feeling suddenly aware of how alone she was on the trail. The forest seemed to hold its breath. A twig snapped beneath Ranger's paw. Emma's head whipped toward the sound. "Is someone there?" Ranger remained perfectly still, his military-grade training from his former life still ingrained despite months of neglect. But his scarred ear twitched, and Emma caught the slight movement through the trees. "Hello!" she called again, her voice higher. When no answer came, she hastily remounted her bike and began pedaling faster than before. Ranger waited until she'd gained distance, then resumed his parallel tracking, moving silently through the underbrush. His instincts to protect, to guard, had awakened after months of mere survival. in his mind, fragmented by trauma. The girl had become something to watch over, though he didn't understand why. As Emma rounded a bend in the trail, the wind shifted, carrying a new scent to Ranger's sensitive nose, unfamiliar humans, cigarette smoke, the sour smell of cheap beer. Male voices drifted through the trees ahead, and Ranger's hackles rose instinctively. He increased his pace, drawing closer to the trail as Emma approached the unseen threat awaiting her around the curve. Emma slowed her bicycle as the trail narrowed between two massive pines. Ahead, the path opened into a small clearing where hikers sometimes stopped to rest, a flat, rocky area with a fallen log that served as a natural bench. As she approached, the murmur of voices grew louder, punctuated by sudden laughter. 3 teenage boys lounged across the clearing. Emma recognized Zach Miller immediately, an 8th grader with a reputation that made younger kids cross to the other side of the hallway at school. Beside him sat his usual companions, Derek Simmons and Travis Cooper, passing a cigarette between them. Empty soda cans and candy wrappers littered the ground around their feet. Emma slowed, considering turning back, but they'd already spotted her. "Well, look who it is," Zach called, standing up from the log with exaggerated formality. At 14, he stood nearly a foot taller than Emma, his lanky frame casting a long shadow across the dirt path. "It's Patterson's kid." Emma gripped her handlebars tighter. "I'm just passing through." "Public trail," Derek added, flicking his cigarette into the underbrush. "We're just passing through, too. Passing something. Anyway," Travis snickered, holding up a silver flask he'd clearly stolen from someone's parents. Zach stepped directly into Emma's path. "Where you headed in such a hurry? Patterson Daddy got you on a curfew." "I need to get home," Emma said firmly, trying to steer around him. Her father had always told her not to show fear around bullies, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Zach's hand shot out, grabbing her handlebar. "Nice bike. My cousin's been looking for one just like it." "Let go," Emma demanded, attempting to yank the bike free. "Make me?" Zach challenged, his grip tightening. 50 yards back. Ranger assessed the situation with the tactical precision that had once made him invaluable to the Henderson family. The German shepherd's muscles tensed beneath his scarred coat as he observed the confrontation. The girl, his girl, as he'd come to think of her during their parallel journey, was in danger. "I said let go." Emma's voice rose as she tried again to pull away. "Or what?" Zach taunted, giving the bike a sudden shove that sent both it and Emma tumbling sideways onto the dirt path. Emma's knee scraped against a rock, tearing her jeans and drawing blood. "Oops," Zach laughed, high-fiving Travis. "Looks like someone needs training wheels." Tears of pain and humiliation sprang to Emma's eyes as she struggled to her feet, but she refused to let them fall. "My dad's a friend of your dad's. Zach. I'm telling him about this." Something ugly flickered across Zach's face. "Your dad needs to mind his own business." He reached for Emma's backpack, which had fallen open in the tumble. "What have you got in here anyway?" "Anything worth taking." A low, rumbling growl froze everyone in place. From the shadowed edge of the clearing emerged Ranger, his posture rigid, hackles raised along his spine. The scarring on his flank and face, combined with his missing ear and the intensity of his amber eyes, made him appear almost otherworldly, a creature conjured from nightmares rather than a domestic animal. "Holy!" Travis stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the log. "Is that a wolf?" Derek hissed, already retreating. Ranger advanced steadily, placing himself between Emma and the boys. His growl deepened, revealing teeth designed for tearing. There was nothing playful or uncertain in his stance. This was a predator prepared to attack. "It's just some mutt," Zach said. But his voice cracked, betraying his fear. He bent down, grabbing a fist-sized rock from the trail. "Get out of here!" he shouted, hurling the rock at Ranger. The stone struck Ranger's scarred flank, causing him to yelp in pain. But he held his position, refusing to retreat. The boys grabbed more rocks, a hail of them pelting Ranger as he continued to shield Emma, who remained frozen in terror behind him. "Come on," Derek finally shouted, tugging at Zach's sleeve. "That thing's rabid or something." The three boys backed away, continuing to throw rocks until they reached the far side of the clearing. Then, with a final volley of stones, they turned and ran down the path toward town. In the sudden silence that followed, Emma stared at the dog that had materialized from nowhere to defend her. Blood trickled from a new cut above his eye where a rock had struck him, mixing with the rain of saliva dripping from his bared teeth. His flanks heaved with each breath, the raised fur along his spine slowly beginning to settle. Ranger turned his head, amber eyes meeting Emma's for the first time. He took a step toward her. Emma scrambled backward, grabbing her bike from the ground. "Stay away," she cried, terrified that having chased off the boys, the beast now intended to attack her. Ranger froze, confused by her fear. In his mind, he had protected her, as he had once protected Tyler. Why was she afraid, taking advantage of his hesitation? Emma swung onto her bike and pedaled away frantically, ignoring the pain in her scraped knee. She glanced back once to see the dog still standing in the clearing, watching her retreat. Ranger waited until the boys were completely gone, sniffing the air to ensure no further threats remained. Then, with a soft whine of pain from his rock-battered body, he resumed his pursuit of Emma, determined to see her safely home even if she didn't understand his purpose. On his porch overlooking a section of the trail, Arnold Weber lowered his binoculars, a thoughtful frown creasing his weathered face. "Now that's something you don't see every day," he murmured to himself, reaching for his telephone. Emma's lungs burned as she pedaled harder than she ever had before. The forest path blurred around her, branches seeming to reach for her as she swerved around roots and rocks. Every few seconds, she glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see the scarred German shepherd bearing down on her. The encounter with Zach and his friends now seemed like the lesser danger compared to the wild dog that had appeared from nowhere. In her mind, the animal's intervention wasn't protection, it was territorial aggression, and now it was pursuing her. "Just keep going," she gasped to herself, standing on the pedals to power up a small incline. The trail widened as it approached the halfway point of her journey, the old covered bridge that spanned Pinewood Creek, marking the invisible boundary between the east and west sides of town. Behind her, Ranger maintained his distance, moving with the fluid grace of a predator despite his injuries. The rocks thrown by the teenagers had opened old wounds and created new ones, but his military training and protective instincts overrode his pain. His one functioning ear swiveled constantly, monitoring for threats, while his nose tested the air. The girl was frightened. He could smell her fear, but he didn't understand that he was its cause. The forest thinned as Emma approached the covered bridge, the ancient wooden structure spanning the shallow creek below. Weathered red boards, faded to the color of rust, formed a tunnel-like passage across the water. Ordinarily, Emma would slow down here to listen to the echo of her tires on the wooden planks. But today, she barreled forward without pause. Halfway across the bridge, Emma heard a sound that made her blood run cold, barking, but not from behind her. From ahead, 3 massive Rottweilers burst from the underbrush on the far side of the bridge, their powerful bodies surging toward her with singular purpose. Emma recognized them immediately. They belonged to Old Man Morgan, whose dilapidated property bordered this section of the trail. The dogs were notorious in Pinewood, kept as guards for Morgan's junkyard collection, but often roaming beyond his unfenced yard. Emma screamed, momentarily freezing before her survival instincts kicked in. She couldn't turn back. The strange German shepherd was behind her. She couldn't go forward. The Rottweilers blocked her path. The creek below was too steep to navigate with her bike. She was trapped. The Rottweilers reached the bridge entrance, their barking echoing menacingly within the wooden structure. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she stopped in the middle of the bridge, one foot on the ground, the other still on a pedal. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew no one would hear her this far from town. "Someone help me!" Ranger heard her cry from 50 yards back. He also heard the Rottweilers, their aggressive barking triggering something primal within him. Without hesitation, he accelerated from his steady trot into a full sprint, closing the distance to the bridge in seconds. Emma, looking desperately for escape, glanced back just in time to see the German shepherd racing toward her, its scarred face and missing ear making it look like something from a horror movie. Caught between 2 threats, she made a split-second decision and dismounted her bike, using it as a barrier between herself and the advancing Rottweilers. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Emma could barely process it. The German shepherd burst past her with such speed that she felt the rush of air as it passed. It never even glanced her way. Instead, launching itself directly at the 3 Rottweilers with a ferocity that transformed it from a mere dog into a force of nature. The ensuing battle was brutal and swift. Though outnumbered, Ranger fought with calculated precision, targeting the lead Rottweiler first, going for the neck with a killing bite he'd been trained never to use except in extreme circumstances. The other 2 dogs swarmed him, one latching onto his already injured flank while the other went for his throat. Emma watched in horror as the 4 dogs became a whirlwind of teeth, claws, and furious growls. Blood spattered the weathered bridge planks. She couldn't tell which animal was winning, only that the violence before her was unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fight shifted. One Rottweiler yelped and retreated, limping badly. The second followed shortly after, blood streaming from a torn ear. The third, the largest of the group, continued fighting until Ranger managed to clamp down on its front leg with bone-crushing force. The dog's agonized howl echoed through the covered bridge before it too retreated, slinking back toward Morgan's property with its tail between its legs. Ranger stood alone on the blood-spattered bridge, sides heaving with exertion, fresh wounds adding to his collection of scars. He turned toward Emma, who pressed herself against the bridge railing, her bike still held before her like a shield. For a moment, they stared at each other, the terrified girl and the battle-worn dog. Ranger took a tentative step forward, whining softly. "Stay back," Emma cried, swinging onto her bike with shaking hands. She pushed off, swerving around Ranger, certain that having dispatched the other dogs, he would now turn his aggression on her. "Leave me alone." Ranger watched her pedal away, confusion evident in his posture. He had protected her again, yet she fled from him as if he were the threat. After ensuring the Rottweilers weren't returning, he resumed his pursuit, his pace now noticeably slower. Blood dripped from multiple wounds, and his breathing had become labored, his tongue lolling from his mouth as he panted in the summer heat. Arnold Weber had just settled back into his porch chair with a fresh glass of sweet tea when his telephone rang. He answered it with the unhurried calm of a man who had seen too much in life to be rushed by modern conveniences. "Weber, residence," he answered, watching a hummingbird dart around his feeder. "Mr. Weber, it's Barbara Patterson," came the anxious voice on the other end. "Have you seen Emma pass by today? She left my house about an hour ago, and I just got a feeling something's not right." Arnold set down his tea. "Matter of fact, I did see her not 20 minutes ago, pedaling like the devil himself was on her tail." He paused, debating whether to mention what else he'd seen. "She wasn't alone, Barbara." "What do you mean?" Barbara's voice sharpened. "Who was with her?" "Not who. What? There's a big shepherd dog following her, looks like it's been through the wars. Scarred up something fierce." Arnold leaned forward in his rocker. "Funny thing is, I saw some of those Miller boys throwing rocks at her earlier, and that same dog ran them off. Then just now, I heard Morgan's Rottweilers going crazy down by the bridge. And next thing I know, Emma's flying past with that same shepherd behind her. A stray dog is chasing my granddaughter." Barbara's voice rose in panic. "Have you called animal control?" "Now. Hold on," Arnold said, his tone measured. "I've been watching through my field glasses. That dog's not chasing her the way you think. It's keeping its distance. Like it's—" He searched for the right word. "Escorting her. Making sure she gets home safe." "You can't be serious," Barbara replied. "I'm calling James right now." "You do that?" Arnold agreed. "But before you get everyone in a panic, just remember things aren't always what they seem at first glance. My Martha used to say that all the time." After hanging up, Arnold returned to his observation post with his binoculars. Through the powerful lenses, he could see Emma still pedaling frantically along the portion of trail visible from his property. About 50 yards behind her, the German shepherd loped steadily onward, clearly struggling now but refusing to abandon its self-appointed mission. "You're something special, aren't you?" Arnold murmured, watching the dog's determined pursuit. "Reminds me of our unit's K9s in Nam. Once they decided you were theirs to protect, nothing short of death would stop them." Emma had no way of knowing she was being observed, or that multiple phone calls were now bouncing between concerned adults. Her world had narrowed to the single-minded goal of reaching home before the dog caught up to her. Her legs ached, and the scratch on her knee had dried into a crusty scab, pulling painfully with each pedal stroke. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead beneath her helmet. 3 miles from home, the trail joined the main road leading into the western side of Pinewood. Usually, Emma welcomed this transition from forest to civilization, but today it offered little comfort. Glancing at her bike's side mirror, a safety feature her father had insisted upon, she could still see the German shepherd doggedly following. Its pace had slowed considerably, but its determination hadn't wavered. "Why won't you leave me alone?" she sobbed, her voice lost in the rush of wind as she pedaled down the gentle slope toward town. Behind her, Ranger was running on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. The combination of malnourishment, dehydration, fresh wounds, and exertion had pushed his body to its limits. His vision had begun to narrow, and his scarred lungs burned with each breath. Yet something primal drove him forward, the same instinct that had sent him back into the burning Henderson house to save Tyler. As they approached the outskirts of town, more houses appeared alongside the road. Ranger kept to the shoulder, maintaining his vigil despite the increasing presence of humans, many of whom stopped to stare at the unusual sight, a young girl pedaling frantically, followed by what appeared to be a half-dead German shepherd. At the Pinewood Market, Benjamin Collins was loading groceries into his truck when Emma flew past on her bicycle. "Whoa there, Speedy," he called. But she didn't acknowledge him, focused entirely on her escape. Moments later, Ben noticed the dog struggling along the same path. "Hey, isn't that—" he began, but the animal was already past him, its single-minded focus as evident as the girl's. Ben pulled out his phone and dialed the local police station. "Maggie, it's Ben from the market. Listen, I just saw the Patterson girl tearing down Maple like she's qualifying for the Tour de France. And there's this mean-looking shepherd dog following her. Might want to send someone to check it out." Similar calls were being made across Pinewood as Emma's desperate journey continued. The narrative forming in the collective mind of the town was clear. A dangerous stray was pursuing James Patterson's daughter, and someone needed to intervene before tragedy struck. James Patterson was hanging drywall at a renovation site when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Seeing his former mother-in-law's name on the screen, he stepped away from his work, wiping plaster dust from his hands. "Barbara, everything okay?" he asked, immediately concerned. Barbara rarely called during work hours. "James, it's Emma," Barbara said without preamble. "Arnold Weber just called. He said Emma's being followed by some wild dog from the trail. I'm too far away to help, but I thought you should know." James's blood ran cold. "What kind of dog did it hurt her? Arnold says it's some kind of shepherd, all scarred up. He thinks it might be protecting her, but James, I'm worried. She's probably terrified." "I'm leaving now," James said, already signaling to his foreman that he needed to go. "I'll call you when I find her." As James threw his tools into his truck, his phone rang again. This time it was the Pinewood Police Department. "Mr. Patterson, this is Dispatcher Maggie. We've received several calls about your daughter being followed by a stray dog. Officer Reynolds is already responding, but we thought you should be aware." "I'm on my way home now," James replied, gunning the engine of his truck. "Tell Officer Reynolds I'll meet him there." The patchwork of calls across Pinewood had created a ripple effect of concern, but none of the well-meaning observers had the complete picture. Each had seen only fragments of Emma and Ranger's journey, the initial pursuit, the confrontation with the Miller boys, the battle at the bridge, or the exhausted chase through town. Without context, the story being constructed was one of danger rather than devotion. Only Arnold Weber, with his elevated view and veteran's intuition, suspected the truth. As he watched the last glimpse of both girl and dog disappear around a bend in the road, he reached for his car keys. Some things needed to be witnessed firsthand, and he had a feeling that whatever was about to happen at the Patterson house would require someone who understood the difference between pursuit and protection. "Martha," he said to the empty chair beside him, as he often did when making important decisions, "I believe we're about to see something remarkable today." The Patterson house stood at the end of Maple Street, a modest two-story colonial with white siding and blue shutters that Margaret had insisted on painting herself the summer before her diagnosis. The front yard, which James maintained with almost obsessive care, stretched from the covered porch to the quiet suburban street where neighbors walked dogs and children played without much supervision. Today, that peaceful street had become the final stretch of Emma's desperate journey. She made the turn onto Maple with her legs burning and her lungs heaving. The once distant sound of sirens now grew closer. But Emma didn't slow down. Home was just 4 houses away. Her bike wobbled as fatigue threatened to overwhelm her. But determination kept her upright and moving forward. In her side mirror, the German Shepherd remained visible, though it had fallen back to nearly 100 yards. Its pace had slowed to a shambling trot, but still it followed, its single-minded purpose unflagging despite its obvious distress. James Patterson's truck screeched around the corner at the opposite end of the street just as Emma reached their driveway. He saw his daughter dismount her bike with frantic haste, letting it clatter to the ground as she stumbled toward the front door. "Emma!" he shouted, accelerating toward her. Emma turned at the sound of her father's voice, tears of relief streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Dad, there's a dog. It's been chasing me all the way from Nana's." James slammed the truck into park in the middle of the street and leaped out, scanning for the threat. He spotted it immediately, a large German Shepherd limping down Maple Street, its dark coat matted with blood and dirt, its tongue hanging from its mouth as it panted heavily. "Get inside," James ordered, rushing to place himself between his daughter and the approaching animal. He glanced frantically around for a weapon, spotting the garden rake leaning against the side of the house. He grabbed it, holding the implement before him like a spear. Emma fumbled with her house key, dropping it twice before managing to unlock the door. "It followed me through the whole forest," she cried, her voice breaking. "It attacked some other dogs at the bridge." "Go inside and call 911, James instructed, not taking his eyes off the advancing dog. "Tell them there's a dangerous stray in our yard." But Emma hesitated at the door, suddenly struck by a realization. "Dad, it also scared away Zach Miller and his friends when they were bothering me." James barely registered her words, focused entirely on the threat approaching his home. The German Shepherd had stopped at the edge of their property, swaying slightly as if struggling to remain standing. Now that it was closer, James could see the extent of its injuries, fresh blood mixed with old scars. One ear, partially missing, ribs visible beneath its dull coat. "Stay back!" James shouted, brandishing the rake. The dog sat down heavily, its strength apparently spent. It made no aggressive move, but James wasn't taking chances. His daughter had been terrified halfway across town by this animal, and its bloodied appearance only reinforced his perception of danger. A police cruiser pulled up behind James's abandoned truck, its lights flashing but siren now silent. Officer Mason Reynolds stepped out, hand resting on his holstered weapon as he assessed the situation. "Mr. Patterson," he called, approaching cautiously. "I received reports about a dog chasing your daughter." "That's it," James confirmed, gesturing with the rake toward the German Shepherd, which remained seated at the edge of their property. "It followed Emma all the way from my mother-in-law's place, 8 kilometers through the woods." Mason studied the dog with a professional eye. In his 7 years on the Pinewood Force, he'd handled numerous animal control situations, but something about this scenario felt different. The dog's posture wasn't aggressive, if anything. It appeared exhausted to the point of collapse. "Has it tried to attack?" he asked, moving closer to James. "Not yet," James admitted. "But look at it. It's clearly been fighting. Emma said it attacked some dogs at the bridge." Emma reappeared in the doorway, her initial panic subsiding enough for her to process what was happening. "It fought the Morgan dogs, Dad," she clarified. "They came at me on the bridge, and this dog jumped in between us." Mason and James exchanged a look, both reconsidering the situation in light of this new information. "And before that," Emma continued, her voice steadier now, "Zach Miller and his friends stopped me on the trail. They pushed me off my bike and were going through my backpack when this dog showed up and scared them away." Mason raised an eyebrow. "The Miller kid has been causing trouble all summer," he noted. "We've had 3 complaints about him and his friends harassing younger kids on that trail." The German Shepherd whined softly, drawing their attention. It attempted to stand, wobbled, and collapsed onto its side on the grass, its flanks heaving with labored breaths. "I think it's dying," Emma whispered, a new emotion concern replacing her fear. Before James or Mason could respond, a battered station wagon pulled up alongside the police cruiser. Arnold Weber emerged slowly, leaning heavily on his cane as he made his way toward them. "Thought I might find you folks having a standoff," the old veteran remarked, nodding respectfully to Officer Reynolds. "Saw the whole thing unfold from my porch. That dog's been shadowing your girl like a guardian angel. Patterson." "A guardian angel," James repeated incredulously. "It terrified her half to death." "Sometimes protection looks like pursuit from the wrong angle," Arnold replied with the cryptic wisdom of his generation. "I watched it run off those Miller hooligans, saw it take on Morgan's Rottweilers too, 3 against 1, and it didn't hesitate." Mason approached the fallen dog cautiously, crouching several feet away to observe without threatening it. The German Shepherd raised its head slightly, amber eyes tracking his movement but making no aggressive display. "He's right, Mr. Patterson," Mason said after a moment. "This dog is severely dehydrated and injured, but it's not showing any signs of aggression. If it had wanted to harm Emma, it had plenty of opportunities." "Then why chase her all this way?" James demanded, though he'd lowered the rake slightly. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "I don't think it was chasing me. I think it was—" She searched for the right word. "Following me. Making sure I got home." Another vehicle approached an animal control van driven by Dr. Sarah Cooper, who served as both Pinewood's veterinarian and its animal control officer. She parked behind Arnold's station wagon and emerged with a medical kit and catch pole. "What have we got? Mason?" she called, approaching the scene. "German Shepherd. Injured but not aggressive," Mason reported. "Possible protective behavior rather than threatening." Sarah nodded, setting aside the catch pole in favor of her medical kit. She moved slowly toward the dog, speaking in a calm, professional tone. "Hey there, big guy. You've had quite a day, haven't you?" The shepherd watched her approach without moving, either too exhausted to flee or somehow understanding she meant no harm. Sarah knelt beside him, conducting a quick visual assessment before gently running her hands along his body, checking for injuries. "Multiple lacerations, signs of dehydration, malnourishment," she reported clinically. And these burn scars are months old. He's been through hell. She looked up at the gathered humans. He needs immediate medical attention. Is he microchipped? Mason asked. Sarah pulled a scanner from her kit and ran it over the dog's shoulder. After a moment, it beeped. Yes, he is. Let's get him to the clinic, and we can trace the registration. James stood frozen, the rake now hanging limply from his hand as he watched Sarah's gentle examination. The narrative he'd constructed of a vicious stray pursuing his daughter was crumbling in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. "Dad," Emma said, tugging at his sleeve, "I just remembered something else. When I got to the end of our street, there was this white van parked there. A man inside was watching me, and he started to open his door, but then he saw the dog behind me and drove away really fast." Mason's head snapped up. "A white van. Did you notice the license plate?" Emma shook her head. "No, but it had some kind of business name on the side. Something with Elite in it. We've had reports of a suspicious white van in the area," Mason said grimly. 3 separate incidents of it following children from school or parks. A chill ran down James's spine as the implications sank in. If what Emma was saying was true, this dog hadn't just protected her from bullies and other animals, it might have saved her from something far worse. "We have a doorbell camera," he said suddenly. "It might have caught the van." Mason nodded. "Good. I'd like to see that footage. And while we're at it, let's see if it shows how this dog was actually behaving when it followed Emma home." James led the group inside, pausing to look back at Sarah, who was preparing to move the German Shepherd to her van. "Will he be okay?" he asked, surprising himself with his concern. Sarah met his eyes. "I'll do everything I can. He's in rough shape, but shepherds are tough dogs." Inside the Patterson home, Mason connected the doorbell camera to the living room television, allowing them all to review the footage. Emma sat between her father and Arnold on the sofa, while Mason operated the controls. "Let's go back about 20 minutes, Mason suggested. "That should cover when Emma arrived home." The footage appeared on screen, showing their empty front yard and the quiet street beyond. Mason increased the playback speed until movement appeared. Emma racing into frame on her bicycle, dismounting in a rush of panicked motion. "There I am." Emma pointed. "The dog should be right behind me." They watched as James's truck appeared, followed by his confrontation with the German Shepherd. Seeing the scene from this objective perspective cast everything in a different light. The dog didn't charge or threaten it, simply sat at the edge of the property, clearly exhausted. "Now let's back up further," Mason suggested. "Let's see if we can spot that van." He rewound the footage to 30 minutes earlier, and they watched in silence as the street remained empty for several moments. Then, a white panel van with Ocean Elite Seafood emblazoned on its side pulled into view, parking with a clear line of sight to the Patterson driveway. "That's it," Emma confirmed. "That's the van I saw." They watched as the van idled for nearly 5 minutes. Then, the driver's door began to open, only to quickly slam shut as something off camera caught the driver's attention. Seconds later, the van accelerated away at high speed, disappearing from frame. "And here comes Emma," Arnold commented as Emma's small figure pedaled into view from the direction the van had fled. Behind her, maintaining a steady distance, the German Shepherd loped into frame. He wasn't right behind you, James realized, watching the dog's careful pacing. He was keeping his distance the whole time. We've had 3 reports of that same van in neighborhoods where children walk alone, Mason said grimly. Never any direct approach, just surveillance. We suspect they're scouting potential targets. A heavy silence fell over the room as the full implications became clear. Whatever the dog's intentions had been, its presence had likely deterred a far more dangerous predator than the Rottweilers at the bridge. "Let me make some calls," Mason said, pulling out his phone. "We need to check other security cameras along Emma's route. Mrs. Abernathy has that system that covers the trail entrance, and I know Weber here has cameras on his property." Arnold nodded. "Got a clear view of about a quarter-mile stretch where the trail runs along my back acres." While Mason made his calls, Emma turned to her father, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad, that dog saved me, didn't he? From the bullies and the Morgan dogs and maybe even from that van. And I was running from him the whole time." James pulled his daughter close, his own eyes suspiciously moist. "Looks that way, sweetheart." "Is he going to die?" Emma whispered. James met Arnold's knowing gaze over his daughter's head. The old veteran's eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen both the worst and best of what humans and animals were capable of. "That dog traveled 8 kilometers to keep you safe," Arnold said gently. "Through woods and heat, injured and hungry. Dogs like that don't give up easily." Mason returned, his expression serious but hopeful. "Mrs. Abernathy is sending her footage to the station now, and I've got 2 officers checking other security cameras along the route. If we can piece together what happened today, we'll have the full story." "And the van?" James asked. "APB is out," Mason confirmed. "Every officer in the county is looking for it." "What about the dog?" Emma asked, wiping her eyes. "Ranger. That's what I'm going to call him. Because he was ranging ahead, keeping me safe." James and Mason exchanged a look, neither wanting to promise anything they couldn't deliver. It was Arnold who answered, his weathered hand patting Emma's shoulder. "Well, seems to me Ranger's earned himself a proper chance," the old veteran said. "Don't you think so, Officer Reynolds?" Mason nodded slowly. "Let's start by finding out who he belongs to. That microchip should tell us his real name and where he came from. After that," he shrugged, "we'll take it one step at a time." James stood. Decision made. "I want to go to the vet clinic. I need to—" He paused, surprised by the intensity of his feeling. "I need to thank him and apologize for not understanding what he was doing." As they prepared to leave for Sarah Cooper's clinic, Mason's radio crackled with an incoming call. He listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious. "We've got a partial on that van," he reported after signing off. "Highway Patrol spotted it headed north on Interstate 5 but lost it in traffic. And there's more, they've connected it to 2 child abduction attempts in Eugene last month." The room fell silent again as they absorbed the news. Emma huddled closer to her father, suddenly understanding how differently her day might have ended without Ranger's vigilant escort. 8 kilometers, Arnold murmured, almost to himself. Through woods and heat, past bullies and savage dogs, all to make sure one child got home safe. He shook his head in wonder. In They're the only ones who love you more than they love themselves. Looks like your ranger there's cut from that same cloth. The Pinewood Veterinary Clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Pine Street, its wraparound porch now serving as a waiting area for pet owners. Today, the usually quiet clinic buzzed with activity as Dr. Sarah Cooper worked frantically to save the German Shepherd who had captured the town's attention. James, Emma, Officer Reynolds, and Arnold Weber waited in the converted living room that served as the clinic's reception area. Emma sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her earlier fear of the dog now transformed into desperate concern. James paced between the vintage fireplace and the front windows, pausing occasionally to place a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "It's been over an hour," Emma whispered. "Why is it taking so long?" Arnold settled his weathered frame into a chair across from her. "That's generally a good sign, young lady. Quick and easy usually means there wasn't much they could do." Mason's radio crackled periodically with updates about the white van, each report confirming their growing suspicions. Highway Patrol had spotted it twice more, but lost it near the Washington state line. The partial license plate had been matched to a vehicle reported stolen from a seafood distribution company 3 weeks earlier. "The pieces are coming together," Mason said grimly after the latest update. "This wasn't random. Someone's been targeting children in the area." The clinic's door swung open as Barbara Patterson bustled in, her face etched with worry. She made straight for Emma, enfolding her granddaughter in a fierce hug. "Thank God you're all right," she murmured, pulling back to examine Emma's face. "When I heard what happened..." She broke off, noticing the tear tracks on Emma's cheeks. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "It's not me. Nana," Emma said, her voice quavering. "It's Ranger. He's really hurt, and it's all my fault. It's all my..." "If I hadn't been so scared of him." "Ranger. The dog, Mom," James explained. "The one that followed Emma from your place." Barbara's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as Mason quickly brought her up to speed on what they'd learned from the security footage and subsequent investigation. "You're telling me that Stray Dog was protecting my granddaughter?" she asked, sinking into a chair beside Emma. "All the way from my house, 8 kilometers, Arnold confirmed with quiet respect, through heat and injury." Barbara shook her head, processing this information. "And now we wait," James said, resuming his pacing. "Dr. Cooper is doing everything she can." The clinic door opened again, this time revealing Sarah Cooper in surgical scrubs spotted with blood. Everyone rose, the question on their faces requiring no voice. "He's stabilized," Sarah announced, removing her surgical cap to reveal disheveled blonde hair. "But I won't lie to you, it was touch and go. He's suffering from severe dehydration, malnourishment, and multiple injuries, both fresh and old." "But he'll live?" Emma asked, her small voice carrying the weight of someone far older. Sarah hesitated. "The next 24 hours will be critical. I've administered fluids, antibiotics, and treated the wounds from today's adventures. But those are just the immediate concerns." "What do you mean?" James asked. Sarah gestured for them to sit. "This dog has been through severe trauma, and not just today. The burn scars on his flank are extensive, consistent with a structure fire. I'd guess he's also got evidence of previous injuries that healed without proper medical care." "He was a stray," Barbara reasoned. "Yes and no," Sarah replied. "He's microchipped, which means he once had a home. I've sent the information to the National Registry, and we're waiting for owner details. How long will that take? Mason asked. Usually just a few hours. The system's pretty efficient. Emma shifted forward on her seat. Can I see him? Sarah exchanged a glance with James, who nodded his permission. Just for a moment. He's heavily sedated and connected to various monitors. It might be a little scary. I won't be scared, Emma promised. Not anymore. Sarah led Emma and James through the clinic to a treatment room in the back. Through a window, they could see the German Shepherd lying on a stainless steel table, an IV line running into his foreleg, electrodes monitoring his heart rate, and an oxygen line helping his labored breathing. Emma pressed her hand against the glass, tears welling in her eyes. The fierce animal that had terrified her hours earlier now looked small and vulnerable beneath the harsh clinical lights. He has burns just like mine, she whispered, unconsciously touching the scar on her arm, a remnant from the car accident that had taken her mother 3 years earlier. James knelt beside his daughter, suddenly seeing the parallel that had escaped him until now. Emma's scars were mostly hidden beneath her clothing, but the psychological wounds of losing her mother had marked her just as visibly as the German Shepherd's physical injuries. Does it hurt him? She asked Sarah. The burns? Not the old ones? Not anymore. Sarah answered gently. But they've left his skin tight in places, which restricts his movement sometimes. That's probably why he seemed to limp even before today's injuries. Emma nodded solemnly. Mom said my scars would stop hurting too. Eventually. She was right about the outside ones. James pulled Emma close, his heart breaking at her simple wisdom. Your mom was smart that way. Sarah left them alone for a moment, returning to the waiting room to update the others. Emma continued to watch the dog's labored breathing, her small face solemn with a child's version of guilt. I wish I hadn't run from him, she said finally. Maybe he wouldn't be so hurt. James struggled to find the right words. You couldn't have known. Em, he looks pretty scary. And you were all alone in the woods, but he was trying to help me, and I just kept running and making him chase me more. Her voice broke. 8 kilometers. Dad, that's what Mr. Weber said. Ranger followed me for 8 kilometers even though he was already hurt and hungry. That's what protectors do, James said softly. They keep going, no matter what. When they returned to the waiting room, Sarah was on the phone, her expression growing increasingly serious as she listened to whoever was on the other end. When she hung up, she turned to the group with renewed purpose. The microchip registry just called back, she announced. His name is actually Duke. He belonged to the Henderson family in Gresham. Belonged. Mason noted her use of past tense. Sarah nodded. There was a house fire 3 months ago. The family survived, but they reported Duke as deceased. According to the registry notes, he pulled their 7-year-old son from the burning house before the fire department arrived, then went back in for the rest of the family. And they left him behind? Barbara asked, outrage coloring her tone. They thought he died in the fire. Sarah clarified. The registry notes indicate the fire department found him unconscious from smoke inhalation the next day during their investigation. They took him to the county shelter, but by then, the Hendersons had already relocated to Arizona to stay with relatives. Did you contact them? James asked. Sarah's expression turned grim. I tried. The number in the registry is disconnected. I left a message with the Gresham Fire Department to see if they have updated contact information, but it might take time. What happens to Duke, Ranger, in the meantime? Emma asked. Legally, he'll be held here for treatment, then transferred to the county shelter if his owners can't be located. Sarah explained gently, given his age, condition, and, well, appearance. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. Shelters were overcrowded, and a scarred, traumatized German Shepherd with medical issues had dim prospects for adoption. "That's not right," Emma stated with childlike certainty. "He saved me." "Emma," James began, but his daughter cut him off with uncharacteristic firmness. "No, Dad. Ranger saved me from Zach and his friends. He saved me from those mean dogs at the bridge. He might have even saved me from that white van. And he did it all while he was hurt and scared and hungry." Her eyes welled with tears. "We can't let them put him in a shelter." James looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't noticed before. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes since Margaret's death had been replaced by fierce determination. For the first time in 3 years, Emma was fighting for something rather than just enduring. "Dr. Cooper," James said slowly. "What would it take for us to foster him just until his owners are found?" Sarah considered this. "It's not standard procedure, but given the circumstances and Officer Reynolds' involvement, I might be able to arrange it." She gave James a searching look. "Are you sure about this? He'll need extensive care during his recovery." Before James could respond, Mason's radio crackled again. This time the message was longer, and Mason's expression darkened as he listened. "The van's been spotted at a rest stop near the Canadian border," he reported after signing off. "State troopers found it abandoned. Evidence inside suggests they've been operating throughout the Pacific Northwest for months." He looked directly at Emma. "They had pictures of several children, including one of you taken outside your grandmother's house earlier today." A heavy silence fell over the room as the full implication sank in. The German Shepherd hadn't just protected Emma from ordinary dangers, he had likely saved her from a fate too terrible to contemplate. James met his daughter's pleading gaze, then looked through the clinic window to where the dog lay fighting for his life. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably in his heart. "We're not fostering him," James said firmly. Everyone turned to him in surprise. "If his original family can't take him back, we're adopting him. Permanently." The next morning dawned clear and warm over Pinewood, sunlight streaming through the blinds of the small examination room where James Patterson had spent the night in an uncomfortable chair. Beside him, Emma slept curled in a similar chair, her small body somehow finding comfort in the awkward position that only children can manage. On the treatment table, Duke, whom they still thought of as Ranger, remained connected to various monitors and IV lines, his condition stable but still serious. Sarah Cooper entered quietly, fresh scrubs replacing yesterday's blood-stained ones. She checked the monitors and made notes on a clipboard before gently rousing James with a touch on his shoulder. "How is he?" James asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Better than expected," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Emma. "His vitals have stabilized, and he's responding well to the antibiotics. The fluids have helped with the dehydration." James rubbed his face, stubble rasping against his palms. "When can we take him home?" "Not for at least 3 days. I want to make sure the infection from his wounds is completely under control, and he needs to regain some strength before he's moved." Sarah glanced at Emma's sleeping form. "You should take her home. Get some proper rest. Both of you." James shook his head. "She won't leave him. Not after everything that happened." Sarah's expression softened. "You know, in 15 years of veterinary practice, I've seen all kinds of bonds between humans and animals. But what's happening here is something special." She checked Ranger's IV line. "This dog chose your daughter, James. Out of all the people he could have followed in those woods, he chose Emma." "Why?" James asked, the question that had been haunting him since yesterday. "Why her?" Sarah considered this. German shepherds were bred to protect. It's hardwired into them at a genetic level. Maybe he recognized something in Emma's vulnerability, perhaps, or a kind of kindred spirit. She gestured to the dog's scarred body. "They've both been through trauma. Sometimes those who are wounded can recognize it in others." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Officer Mason Reynolds entered, looking as tired as James felt, but carrying a laptop and several folders. "Sorry to disturb you," Mason said, nodding to Sarah. "But I thought you'd want to see this right away." He set up the laptop on a side table and opened several video files. "We've collected security footage from 6 different locations along Emma's route yesterday. When you see them in sequence, it tells quite a story." James gently woke Emma, who blinked drowsily before immediately looking to check on Ranger. Reassured by the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest, she turned her attention to Mason's laptop. "This first clip is from Mrs. Abernathy's camera at the trailhead," Mason explained, starting the video. The footage showed Emma entering the trail on her bicycle, unaware of anything amiss. Moments later, the German Shepherd appeared, watching her departure before following at a careful distance. Shortly after, 3 teenage boys entered the trail, passing around what appeared to be a cigarette. "That's Zach and his friends," Emma confirmed quietly. The next video, from a different camera, showed the confrontation in the clearing, though there was no audio. The scene was clear: Zach and his friends accosting Emma, knocking her off her bike, and then the dramatic intervention of Ranger, placing himself between Emma and the boys. "He didn't even hesitate," James murmured, watching the dog stand firm despite the rocks being thrown at him. Arnold Weber's footage came next, showing Emma fleeing on her bicycle with Ranger maintaining a consistent distance behind her. As they watched, a white van appeared briefly at the edge of the frame, slowly cruising along the road that paralleled the trail. "That's the same van," Mason confirmed grimly. They were tracking Emma's route. The most dramatic footage came from a security camera mounted on a power pole near the covered bridge. It captured the full confrontation with Morgan's Rottweiler's 3 massive dogs charging toward Emma, and Ranger's extraordinary leap into action. The ensuing fight was brief but brutal, ending with the Rottweilers retreating and Ranger visibly injured, resuming his escort mission despite his worsening condition. "Look how he keeps checking behind him," Sarah noted, pointing to Ranger's behavior after the fight. "He's making sure the other dogs aren't coming back before he continues following Emma." The next clips showed Ranger's determined pursuit through town, his pace slowing but his purpose unwavering. In one, the white van appeared again, this time parking at an intersection where Emma would need to pass. The driver's door began to open, but quickly slammed shut when Ranger came into view behind Emma. They were waiting for her, Mason explained, his professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine anger. But they weren't expecting a guard dog. The final footage, from the Pattersons' own doorbell camera, showed what they had already witnessed firsthand: Emma's arrival home, Ranger's collapse from exhaustion, and the confrontation that followed. 8 kilometers, Arnold Weber's voice came from the doorway, where he stood leaning on his cane. That dog followed your girl for 8 kilometers, protecting her from danger she didn't even know existed. He nodded to Mason. Any word on those men in the van? Mason closed the laptop with a sigh. The van was definitely connected to a trafficking ring operating throughout the Pacific Northwest. FBI's involved now. They found detailed maps of school routes, photographs of at least 12 children, and some equipment. He glanced at Emma and chose his next words carefully. Items consistent with planned abductions. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the steady beep of Ranger's heart monitor. There's one more thing, Mason said, pulling a folder from his stack. The Gresham Fire Department sent over their report on the Henderson fire. Apparently, it started in the kitchen while the family was sleeping. Duke Ranger woke them by barking, then physically pulled 7-year-old Tyler from his bed when the boy wouldn't wake up. He got the child out the back door before going back for the parents. He went back in, Sarah asked, professional interest mingling with admiration. Mason nodded. According to the report, the father, Michael Henderson, was overcome by smoke while trying to reach his wife, Patricia, who was trapped in their bedroom. Duke managed to drag Michael to a window where firefighters found him, but the structure partially collapsed before they could reach Patricia. Did she survive? James asked quietly. Yes, but with severe burns. She was airlifted to the burn unit in Portland. The report says she was in critical condition for weeks. Mason flipped a page. The family lost everything. According to follow-up notes, they relocated to Phoenix, where Patricia's sister lives, to be close to a specialized burn treatment center. And they thought Duke died in the fire, Sarah concluded. The fire marshal found him the next day during the investigation, unconscious in the master bedroom. Apparently, he'd been trying to reach Patricia until the smoke overwhelmed him. Mason closed the folder. They took him to the county shelter, but by then, the Hendersons had already left the state. Emma, who had been quietly absorbing all this information, spoke up. So he saved his whole family, and they left him behind. They thought he was dead, sweetie, James explained gently. They were dealing with their own injuries and trauma. But when he woke up at the shelter, no one came for him, Emma persisted, the injustice of it clear in her young mind. He saved them, and no one saved him. Sarah checked her watch. I've got rounds to make, but I'll be back to check on him in an hour. There's coffee in the waiting room if you need it. After Sarah left, Mason gathered his materials. I've got to get back to the station. The FBI wants statements from everyone involved in yesterday's events. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I've included a formal commendation for Duke in my report. Not that dogs care much about paperwork, but it might help with the adoption process if it comes to that. Once Mason had gone, Arnold settled into the chair he'd vacated his weathered hands resting on his cane. "You know," he said conversationally, "my Martha always said that nothing in this world happens by accident. Everything has a purpose. If you look hard enough to find it." James raised an eyebrow. "You think there was a purpose to all this? A dog who survived a fire just happening to find my daughter in the woods? 8 kilometers is a long way to follow someone by coincidence." Arnold replied mildly, "And it seems to me this dog has a calling for saving children in danger." Emma, who had moved to stand beside Ranger's table, gently placed her hand on the dog's uninjured shoulder. "I think Mr. Weber's right. Dad, Ranger was supposed to find me." Before James could respond, Sarah returned, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "I just got off the phone with the Henderson family," she announced. "The Gresham Fire Department had their current contact information." "What did they say?" James asked, suddenly tense. Despite his initial fear of the dog, he had already begun to think of Ranger as theirs. The prospect of returning him to his original family created an unexpected pang of loss. They were shocked. Of course, they truly believed Duke had died in the fire. Sarah pulled up a chair. "Michael Henderson broke down when I told him what Duke did yesterday, saving Emma after everything he'd been through." "Are they coming to get him?" Emma asked, her hand protectively covering Ranger's scarred ear. Sarah hesitated. "That's the complicated part. They can't take him back, even if they wanted to. Patricia's medical needs required them to move into Patricia's sister's condo, which doesn't allow pets. And Patricia's recovery has been difficult, multiple surgeries, ongoing physical therapy. They simply don't have the resources to care for Duke right now." James felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. "So what happens now?" "Michael asked if we could help find Duke a good home. When I mentioned your interest in adopting him, he seemed relieved." Sarah smiled gently at Emma. "He said something about the symmetry of it, Duke saving their child and then yours." "So we can keep him." Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile James had seen in months. "It's not quite that simple," Sarah cautioned. "The Hendersons would like to meet with you virtually, since they can't travel easily. They want to make sure Duke is going to a family that understands his history and needs." "Of course," James agreed immediately. "We'd want that too. I've scheduled a video call for tomorrow morning, if that works for you," Sarah said. Michael also mentioned that their son Tyler has been having a hard time, nightmares about the fire, anxiety. He thinks seeing that Duke is alive and well might help with his healing process. James nodded, understanding completely. The parallels between Tyler Henderson and Emma were striking, both children marked by trauma, both connected to this extraordinary dog. "We'll do whatever helps," he assured Sarah. "Just tell us when and where." As Sarah left to prepare for the video call, Arnold rose stiffly from his chair. "Think I'll head home and let you folks have some time with your dog," he said, emphasizing the last 2 words with a knowing smile. Martha would have loved this story. She always said dogs see the truth of us better than we see ourselves. After Arnold's departure, James and Emma settled into a comfortable silence, watching over Ranger as he slept. The steady beep of the heart monitor created a soothing rhythm that nearly lulled James to sleep again. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "do you think Mom would have liked Ranger? The question caught James off guard. Emma rarely spoke of Margaret unprompted, the loss still too raw even 3 years later. "I think," he said carefully, "she would have loved him. Your mom always had a soft spot for the broken ones who kept fighting anyway." Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer. "That's what I thought too." The next morning, the Pattersons gathered in Sarah's office for the video call with the Henderson family. Ranger had improved enough to be moved to a recovery kennel, where he now rested comfortably on a padded bed. The IV still attached, but fewer monitoring devices necessary. Sarah's computer screen flickered to life, revealing a man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and stress lines around his eyes. Beside him sat a boy of about 7, thin and solemn-faced, with the watchful eyes of a child who has seen too much. A woman was partially visible in the background, seated in what appeared to be a specialized wheelchair. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah began. "I'm Dr. Cooper. These are the Pattersons, James and Emma." Michael Henderson nodded, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Thank you for taking care of Duke," he said, his voice rough. "When the fire department told us he didn't make it, it was like losing a family member." "He's pretty amazing," James replied sincerely. "What he did for Emma yesterday—" He broke off, still struggling to find words adequate to express his gratitude. "Can we see him?" the boy Tyler asked quietly, speaking for the first time. Sarah adjusted the laptop so its camera faced Ranger's kennel. The German shepherd was awake now, his amber eyes alert despite his injuries. At the sound of Tyler's voice, his ears perked up, and he raised his head. "Duke," Tyler called, his voice breaking. "Duke, is that really you?" The reaction was immediate and undeniable. Ranger's tail began to thump against his bed, and he whined softly, straining to rise despite his weakness. "Easy, boy," Sarah cautioned, moving to prevent him from disturbing his IV. Tears streamed down Tyler's face as he watched his dog's recognition. "He remembers me," the boy whispered. "Of course he does," Emma said confidently. "He's the bravest, smartest dog in the world." Michael wiped his eyes, visibly moved by the reunion. "We thought he died saving us," he said. "All this time, he's been out there alone, thinking we abandoned him." "He wasn't alone yesterday," James said. "He found Emma, and now, if you're willing, we'd like to give him a home." Michael looked at his son, then back at the Pattersons. "Duke saved Tyler from the fire, and now he's saved your daughter too." He took a deep breath. "It seems like he's chosen his path. What do you think?" "Buddy?" he asked Tyler. "Dr. Cooper says Duke needs a family who can take care of all his special needs. We can't bring him to Aunt Susan's place, but the Pattersons have a house with a yard. And Emma really loves him." Tyler was quiet for a long moment, still watching Ranger's reaction to his voice. "Will you take good care of him?" he finally asked Emma directly. "He doesn't like thunderstorms, and his favorite toy is a blue ball, and sometimes his leg hurts where it got burned, so you have to rub it gentle." Emma nodded solemnly, recognizing the sacred trust being placed in her. "I promise. And maybe you could visit him sometime, or we could do more video calls so you can see him." Tyler looked to his father, who nodded encouragement. "I'd like that," the boy said softly. from his kennel. Ranger whined again, as if understanding the significance of the conversation determining his fate. "It's settled, then," Michael said, his voice steadier now. Ranger has a new mission, a new family to protect." He looked directly at James. "You're getting one hell of a dog, Mr. Patterson. The best there is." As the call ended, James realized that something fundamental had shifted in the universe of their small family. The empty space left by Margaret's death, a void they had carefully navigated around for 3 years, was not being filled exactly, but was changing shape. Where there had been only absence, something new was forming, not a replacement, but a different kind of presence. Ranger, sensing this shift perhaps better than the humans, thumped his tail against his bed and fixed his amber gaze on Emma with the unwavering focus of a guardian who had found his purpose. 3 months later, on a golden September afternoon, Emma Patterson stood at the edge of Whispering Pines Trail with Ranger by her side. The German shepherd's coat had regained much of its luster, though the burn scars would always mark him. A specially designed harness identified him as a service animal, with PTSD support dog embroidered on both sides. "Ready, boy?" Emma asked, adjusting her helmet strap. Ranger's response was immediate, a soft woof and a tail wag that conveyed his eagerness to begin their journey. As Emma mounted her bicycle, Ranger positioned himself beside her, no longer following at a distance, but proudly escorting his charge in full view. In the 3 months since that fateful day, both Emma and Ranger had undergone remarkable transformations. Under Dr. Cooper's care, Ranger had recovered from his physical injuries with the resilience characteristic of his breed. The more profound healing, however, had occurred in the Patterson home, where the dog had found not just shelter but purpose. For Emma, the change was equally significant. The quiet, withdrawn child who had moved through life with careful caution since her mother's death had rediscovered her voice and confidence. The therapist, James, had finally convinced her to see noted that having Ranger as a responsibility gave Emma something many trauma survivors desperately need: a reason to focus outward rather than inward. "We'll be back before dinner, Dad," Emma called over her shoulder as she began pedaling down the trail, Ranger loping easily alongside her. James watched from the porch, a mixture of pride and lingering anxiety on his face. The first time Emma had asked to ride to her grandmother's house after the incident, he had flatly refused. It had taken weeks of negotiation, the introduction of a high-tech tracking system on Emma's phone, and Ranger's certification as a service animal before he reluctantly agreed. "She'll be fine," Barbara said, joining him on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. His mother-in-law had taken to visiting more frequently since Ranger joined their family, claiming it was to help with the dog's care, but transparently delighted by the changes in her granddaughter. That dog would die before letting anything happen to her. "I know," James admitted, accepting the tea. "But after what almost happened—" "But it didn't happen," Barbara reminded him gently, "because that dog found her when she needed him most." James nodded, watching until Emma and Ranger disappeared around a bend in the trail. The FBI investigation into the white van had revealed a trafficking operation more extensive than anyone in Pinewood had imagined. 3 men had been arrested, and evidence suggested they had successfully abducted at least 2 children from neighboring counties before targeting Emma. "Good thing we listened to Arnold before it was too late," James murmured, more to himself than to Barbara. Arnold Weber had become a regular visitor to the Patterson home during Ranger's recovery, bringing homemade dog treats and endless stories about the military working dogs he'd known in Vietnam. His intuition about Ranger's protective nature had proved correct in ways none of them could have anticipated. "Speaking of Arnold," Barbara said, "he called this morning. The mayor's office confirmed everything for the ceremony tomorrow." James groaned good-naturedly. "I still think this whole thing is overblown. Ranger doesn't need a medal." "It's not about what Ranger needs," Barbara countered with the wisdom of her years. "It's about what the town needs. People want to celebrate something good for a change, especially after all those awful revelations about the trafficking ring. The Canine Hero Ceremony, as the local newspaper had dubbed it, had evolved from a simple acknowledgement by the town council into a community-wide celebration. Pinewood's mayor, never one to miss a photo opportunity, had embraced the story of the scarred German shepherd who had traveled 8 kilometers to save a child from multiple dangers. Inside the house, the living room wall now featured an arrangement of framed newspaper articles and photographs documenting Ranger's story. The largest, from the front page of the Pinewood Gazette, showed Emma and Ranger at Dr. Cooper's clinic during his recovery. The headline reading, "Stray Dog Chases Girl 8 km, Saves Her from Unimaginable Danger." National media had picked up the story after security footage of Ranger's confrontation with the bullies and Rottweilers was released as part of the FBI's case against the trafficking suspects. The image of the scarred, one-eared dog placing himself between Emma and danger had resonated with people across the country. The Henderson family had remained in contact through regular video calls, which proved therapeutic for both Tyler and Emma. The two children, bonded by their shared connection to Ranger and their experiences with trauma, had developed a friendship that transcended distance. Tyler's nightmares about the fire had decreased substantially since seeing that Duke, now Ranger, was alive and well with a new purpose. As promised, the Pattersons kept the Hendersons updated on Ranger's progress, sending photos and videos of his recovery and new life. In return, Michael Henderson had shipped a box containing Ranger's old blue ball, his original collar, and photos of him with their family before the fire-precious mementos that helped the Pattersons understand Ranger's history. One such photo now held a place of honor on Emma's bedside table, Ranger as a younger dog, standing proudly beside Tyler on the boy's 5th birthday, both of them wearing party hats. It was a glimpse into the life he had before the fire that had nearly claimed him, a reminder that the scars he bore were badges of heroism rather than markers of victimhood. As Emma and Ranger made their way through the familiar trail, the forest that had once seemed threatening now felt welcoming. The dappled sunlight through the trees created shifting patterns on the path ahead, and birds called from the branches overhead. Emma pedaled at a relaxed pace, occasionally glancing down at Ranger, who moved with the fluid grace of an animal in his element. At the clearing where Zach Miller and his friends had accosted her, Emma paused, dismounting her bike. This spot, once marked by fear in her memory, had been reclaimed through repeated visits with Ranger at her side. The fallen log where the boys had sat was now just a natural feature of the landscape, stripped of its negative associations. "You know what, Ranger," Emma said, sitting on the log and patting the space beside her. The German shepherd immediately jumped up, settling into a dignified sitting position. "I think Mom would be really proud of us." Ranger tilted his head, his amber eyes fixed on her face with that peculiar intensity that sometimes made Emma wonder how much he truly understood. Dad says she always liked the broken ones who kept fighting, Emma continued, absently rubbing the scarred portion of Ranger's ear. That's us. Isn't it? We're both a little broken, but we keep going. Ranger leaned against her side, a warm, solid presence that had become her anchor in the months since he'd entered their lives. His certification as a service dog for PTSD had been Dr. Cooper's suggestion. After noticing how Emma's anxiety symptoms diminished in his presence, the training had been intensive for both Emma and Ranger, but the results were undeniable. The nightmares that had plagued Emma since her mother's death had decreased in both frequency and intensity. The panic attacks that once left her frozen in fear now rarely progressed beyond mild anxiety before Ranger's intuitive interventions helped her regulate her breathing and ground herself in the present moment. As they continued their journey toward Barbara's house, Emma thought about the ceremony planned for the next day. The mayor would present Ranger with a medal for bravery. The police department would officially recognize his role in helping identify the trafficking operation, and Dr. Cooper would announce a new scholarship program for treating injured strays, named in Ranger's honor. But the part Emma looked forward to most was the surprise that had arrived yesterday, a video message from the Henderson family announcing they would be visiting Pinewood the following month. Patricia's doctors had finally cleared her for travel, and Tyler was desperate to see Ranger in person. The Pattersons had immediately offered their guest room, setting in motion plans for a reunion 3 months in the making. Barbara was waiting on her porch when Emma and Ranger arrived, her face lighting up at the sight of her granddaughter's confident posture and easy smile. "Right on time," she called, descending the steps to greet them. "And how's our hero today?" Ranger responded with a dignified wag of his tail, accepting Barbara's affectionate pat with the grace of a dog who knew his worth. "He's excited about tomorrow," Emma replied, dismounting her bike. "I told him he's going to be famous." Barbara chuckled. "More famous than he already is. That dog's picture has been in more newspapers than the president's." As they settled on Barbara's porch with lemonade for the humans and a bowl of water for Ranger, Emma watched her dog surveying the yard with alert interest. 3 months ago, he had been a shadow among the trees, scarred and starving, driven by instincts he didn't fully understand. Now, he was family, a vital piece of the puzzle that made their lives whole. "You know," Barbara said thoughtfully, watching Emma scratch behind Ranger's ears, "your mother always said everything happens for a reason, even the painful things." Emma nodded, thinking of the long chain of events that had brought Ranger into their lives: a house fire in Gresham, a mistaken death, an escape from a shelter, and 8 kilometers of determined pursuit through woods and danger. "I think the reason is sitting right here," she said simply, leaning against Ranger's solid warmth. From his place on the porch steps, Ranger gazed out at the tree line where he had once hidden, watching over a child he didn't know but somehow recognized needed protection. His journey had been long and painful, marked by loss and sacrifice. But it had led him here to a home where his scars were badges of honor and his purpose was clear. As Arnold Weber would say at the ceremony the next day, his weathered voice carrying across the town square, "Sometimes what looks like something chasing you is actually something watching over you. Folks just need to look at things from the right angle. And sometimes that angle is through a security camera. In the twilight of our years, we recognize a truth that eluded us in youth, sometimes protection comes in unexpected forms, bearing scars that tell stories of sacrifice. Like Ranger, we've all experienced fires that have marked us, losses that have changed us, and journeys that seemed without purpose. Remember when neighborhoods felt safer, when children could ride bikes without constant tracking. That world isn't entirely gone. It lives in the silent guardians among us, in the wounded warriors who still find strength to stand between innocence and danger. When that German shepherd traveled 8 kilometers, exhausted and injured, to protect a child he didn't know, he embodied something we fear is vanishing from our society: unwavering commitment to others, regardless of personal cost. Look around your community today. Who stands watch despite their scars? Who travels the distance when others turn away? In a world increasingly isolated by technology and fear, Ranger's story reminds us that connection across generations, across species, across tragedy, remains our greatest salvation. The broken can still be protectors. The wounded can still find purpose. Through security cameras or weary eyes, sometimes we need to change our angle to see love in what we mistook for threat.